Good afternoon. I am Dr. Donna Jones, president of the Greater New York chapter of the Lynx Incorporated. On behalf of the Greater New York Lynx and our partner, the NYU McSilver Institute, I would like to welcome all of you to the launch of the She Leads Speaker Series. We are delighted that our inaugural featured speaker is a trailblazer and history maker, and the first Black woman to hold both citywide and statewide office. We are so honored that we are kicking off this series and celebrating Women's History Month with New York State's Attorney General Letitia James. Welcome, Madam Attorney General. We are thrilled that our moderator for today is Dr. Christina Greer, who is a highly regarded political commentator and can be seen regularly on MSNBC and New York One, and is regularly quoted in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and the Associated Press. Dr. Greer is a scholar and an associate professor of political science and American studies at Fordham University. Dr. Greer is the author of Black Ethnics, Race, Immigration, and the Pursuit of the American Dream. She is a 2018 NYU McSilver Fellow in Residence, the co-host of the FAQ NYC and What's in It for Us podcast, and editor at large at Aussie TV. Welcome, Dr. Greer.
Unmuted. Thank you so much, Dr. Jones, and I am so grateful to be here today, and I want to thank the Greater New York chapter of the Lynx and NYU McSilver Institute for inviting me to be a part of this important discussion with Madam Attorney General Tish James, who needs no introduction, but I'll give you just a short bio. Letitia Tish James is the 67th Attorney General for the state of New York. Attorney General James has shattered the glass ceiling by becoming the first woman of color to hold statewide office in New York and the first woman to be elected Attorney General. In 2013, Tish James was elected public advocate for the city of New York and became the first woman of color to hold citywide office. In this role, Ms. James successfully took on the gun industry by pushing New York City's largest pension fund to divest from gun and ammunition retailers. She fought in court on behalf of children and families on issues including children in foster care, children with disabilities, and tenant protection. Prior to serving as public advocate, Tish James represented the 35th Council District in Brooklyn in the New York City City Council for 10 years. And as a council member, she passed the Safe Housing Act, legislation that forced landlords to improve living conditions for tenants in New York City's worst buildings. Tish James is celebrated for her fearless leadership, for being a truth teller and a woman of action. She is the embodiment of She Leads. And so before we get started, I just want to remind everyone on the call today to please put any and all questions in the Q&A section, and we'll get to as many as possible during the program. I want to also give a special thank you to Rose Pierre-Louis for inviting me and the incredible McSilver staff who always puts everything together and in seamless fashion. So I want to thank them as well. So without further ado, many of you know Tish as Tish, but we are honored to have Madam Attorney General here today. Welcome, New York Attorney General Tish James. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Professor Greer, and thank you, Dr. Jones, and thank the Lynx chapter and the NYU McSilver Center. Thank you for having me here this afternoon. I decided to wear my spring colors, but I did it in honor and in celebration and in homage to the Lynx.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, you're lucky that I'm not too close because I would be in the closet right now. I am wearing my Lynx green in support today. So let's get into it. And please, for those who are watching, please put any questions in the chat. I know you probably have so many for Madam Attorney General. So I want to start with this first one. So given these recent events related to the tragic death of George Floyd, and we know we have trial coming up on Monday. We've had the death of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless others. There's a global cry and a call to action to end systemic racism and injustice that African Americans, Asian Americans, Latinx folks, and other vulnerable communities face in society and inside the workplace. Can you talk to us about the role women play in the movement? And how can we strengthen our bond to stand in solidarity to build a more inclusive and just society?
Thank you, Professor Greer, for that question. As you know, we find ourselves in the midst of several pandemics, COVID-19, economic inequalities, and obviously the pandemic has devastated industries dominated by women. And so the feminization of poverty is real. And then lastly, the pandemic of racial unrest, given, unfortunately, the killings of all of those who you mentioned, including but not limited to Daniel Prude in Rochester and so many others. And women have been in the forefront of most of the struggles, and they've been in the forefront of this movement. I can think back to individuals like W.E.B. Du Bois and individuals, other women who were, W.E.B. Du Bois and of course, Mary Terrell and Sojourner Truth, and all of those who've been in the forefront of so many struggles, from the Niagara movement to the NAACP to Eliza Garza and Black Lives Matter. So many women have been in the forefront, and we all know that women have been in the forefront of all of our institutions as a people. And for every major movement, there have been women, and particularly women of color. And we often get ignored, we often are overshadowed, and we often are not celebrated. And we have fought for our own rights and the rights of our communities, the rights of the marginalized and the vulnerable. And we are seeing today, as we see all of these young people march for racial reckoning and for racial consciousness and for simple justice on the streets of New York and all across this country. And these we've been protesting with power and with passion, again, standing up for the rights of individuals, and particularly Black male and women who have been killed at the hands of police. And our involvement will not end, it will continue. And so most movements in this country, again, at the forefront, have been women, and particularly women of color, who have not been celebrated. And that's why it is so critical that we get together, particularly during this month, and talk about issues that impact women, and talk about our struggles, talk about income inequality, talk about equal pay for equal work, talk about the fact that Black women on average make significantly less than our white counterparts. We need to talk about the feminization of poverty, talk about industries that have been decimated as a result of this pandemic, which have been dominated by women and women of color. Talk about all of the women who sacrifice each and every day to go to work, even during at the height of this pandemic. They were going to work, and they were primarily women of color. Talk about all of the individuals, particularly women that we've lost in nursing homes. And lastly, let's really talk about how we just hold up the consciousness of this country, and how we, again, have been in the forefront of standing up for democracy and the basic element of our democracy, and that is the right to vote. And so we've got to shout out Stacey Abrams, given the fight that's happening in Georgia right now. And there are attempts to roll back the clock of progress. We have not seen these types of attempts since Jim Crow, and is nothing more than a power play. Individuals who basically lost 4 years ago when she ran for governor, lost last year when we elected a Jewish and a Black individual to the United States Senate, and now want to hold on to power given the changing demographics of Georgia and all across the South. And so we've got to stand with them. And my office, the Office of Attorney General, will stand with all of those, the NAACP, as they seek legal options to challenge the efforts by those who want to hold on to power, and as we demand and as we push the Biden administration to pass H.R. 1, which will, again, promote and standardize voting throughout the United States of America. And that's what's really critically important. And that is the call to action right now.
Well, I don't think it's lost on, many of us on this call that Black women in leadership from New York to Georgia and across the country are the ones who are upholding our democratic values. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned, this is Women's History Month, on the tail of Black History Month. So I extend February, March into one collective month to celebrate Black women. So I'm so glad that the McSilver Institute put this program together today. And so, you touched on this, but empowering women benefits the entire village, our nation and our world. And so by creating this awareness of the struggles and successes of women, we can not only help better their circumstances, but learn and be inspired by their determination and inner strength and grace. How are you sort of keeping that in the forefront of your mind with all that is going on right now on your plate?
So, when the times are the darkest, that is when we as women tend to shine. I get my grace by my community, a community that continues to struggle, a community that tends to overcome those struggles, and a community that reminds me that the struggle is real and the struggle is not over. And I am also grounded in the fact that, I'm a woman of faith, and the steel in my backbone comes from my faith and comes from a history of people that have struggled time and time again, and will continue to stand up, just as they are standing up in Georgia and in other states which seek to turn back the clock of progress. Those states that seek to turn back the clock of progress for women in terms of using COVID-19 as an excuse to deny us reproductive rights. Those states, again, that are putting in barriers for us exercising the right to vote. And those states that unfortunately are not providing us with economic opportunity and not promoting women and elevating women into positions of power. All across this country, given our numbers, given our percentage, there is still not enough women who are elected to local, state, and on the federal level, given our percentages in society. And so it's important that young people and all individuals, all women, run for office and recognize the power that's in their hand. Two, it's grace when I see on the faces of women who look like me, their struggles. And when I look at all of the work that has yet to be done, we had 4 years of political angst. And during the last 2 years as serving as the Attorney General of the state of New York, it was an honor and a privilege to stand with California as the two bookends in defending our democracy all across this country. My office filed more cases against the previous administration on behalf of the environment, on behalf of the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and in the energy that we all consume, ensuring that it's clean, protecting the rights of immigrants, standing up for the census, kicking the ICE out of our courthouses, standing up against all of the Muslim bans, standing up for reproductive rights, standing up against this administration, against housing discrimination and all types of discrimination, standing up against this administration for all of its racial animus. And in all of the cases that we brought in New York, in the last 2 years that I have served as the Attorney General, we won 85% of our cases against this administration. And now we are working with the Biden administration and the Harris administration to reverse all of those regressive policies and to stand up again for the rights of New York. I never thought that I would be the Attorney General standing up for states' rights, but I've been called at this moment in time. And as a result of that, I am called because my ancestors, it's part of my DNA to stand up and to fight back and to protect marginalized and vulnerable populations, particularly when they're under attack. And let me just say, although he is no longer in office, the fact is that he is still the leader of the Republican Party, and the policies that are reflected not only in Georgia, but all around, all in red states, again, is a reflection of an individual, again, whose values were abhorrent to my own and who stand against everything that I believe in. And I know that the links stand with me. And I know Professor Greer, as I watch you on MSNBC, you stand with us also. And that's where we get our grace from. We get it from our struggle and from our history as a people. And now is not the time to be silent. Silence, my friend, and sitting by the sidelines is not an option.
Well, I mean, Madam Attorney General, when you say that, it's because it's not just New York. I mean, it's Georgia. We're seeing these policies in states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Arizona. I mean, these are patterns where we have to stay vigilant. I love that you talk about your ancestors and providing that steel backbone, because I'm sure that almost every woman on this call has had to dig deep throughout her lifetime to really remember the sacrifices that our ancestors have made. I think it's interesting. I keep a picture of my great-grandmother behind me, just sort of pushing me forward as I'm sitting on Zoom calls and working all day. And so I wanted to sort of shift gears just a little bit, because as the first woman in New York to be elected as Attorney General, upholding the rights of our Constitution, our state Constitution, our United States Constitution, you're the first African-American woman to be elected to statewide office and the first Black person to serve as Attorney General. So what do you think we can do to advance more Black women in government and politics? And you touched on the importance of running, but we know that there's some financial burdens that some women of color have. Some people don't want to open up their pocketbooks as quickly and open up their wallets as deeply when it comes to women of color running. There's some other hurdles and obstacles that we have to overcome, just phenotypically, based on hair and weight and whether we have kids or not too many kids, or whether we're too young or too old or whatever it may be. So how can we really encourage other women to get into government and politics and really build that long pipeline to continue the legacy of Black women in city council, in Albany, and now statewide office, since you've busted that ceiling?
So we've known for a long time that Black women have been the conscience of our country and the backbone of our democracy. I'm not really caught up in titles. I tend not to get caught up in titles because I know a lot of people with titles who do absolutely nothing with the power that they have. For me, it's really all about what you can accomplish and where you stand in times of crisis and controversy. For me, that is what is critical. And so I admire all of those who struggle each and every day to put food on their table, all of those women who are juggling jobs and trying to teach their children at their kitchen table their homework and their curriculum, and then try to find time for themselves. Those are my heroes and sheroes. But also my heroes and sheroes are individuals like Shirley Chisholm, who once said that if they don't provide you a seat at the table, bring your own folding chair. Well, I want to create my own table and invite my friends who I know will bring their own chairs to the table. I want to expand that table to make sure that we represent a true democracy. And a true democracy is reflective of all voices, and all voices need to be at the table. So we've got to include the LGBT community, the trans community. We've got to include other communities, again, that have been ignored and locked out of the sunshine of opportunity. And we also have to talk about another one of someone who I've studied all throughout my legal career, and that is Barbara Jordan, who, as you know, served on the Judiciary Committee when they were seeking to impeach Reagan and Nixon, and she indicated that she would not sit silent in the face of anyone who was subverting the law and or the Constitution. And so all that I do in my role as the Attorney General is to make sure that the Constitution, the four corners of the Constitution, applies to everyone, and that no one is left out. Now, when I ran for office, I didn't know individuals with deep pockets. In fact, most of the people around me were people with no pockets. I did not know a lot of people with white collars. I knew a lot of people with pink collars and or no collars. And so I sat at the table with women from public housing who talked to me about the conditions in public housing and the issues in public housing. And they wanted the same thing that you and I wanted: good schools, clean housing, clean streets, and to be kept safe. I spoke with a lot of my Latino brothers and sisters who talked to me about immigration and who talked to me about the struggles of their families back in countries that were being torn apart by violence, and all they wanted to be was reunited with their families. And individuals who were at the border, who unfortunately were being denied something which is recognized in our Constitution, asylum. I spoke to Muslims who, again, were unfortunately being victimized as a result of individuals who viewed them as terrorists. And I talked to other different groups, and those are the individuals who elevated me. And those are the individuals who I go to now. And those are the individuals who keep me grounded. And those are the individuals on the ground. Grassroots organizing is all that I am and all that I am about. And so I do not wish to be lionized, because I am no different from your neighbor. And I just need to use the power that I have right now, the power that has been given to me right now, to elevate the voices of others, and particularly women and women of color.
Well, I mean, I smiled when you mentioned Barbara Jordan, because I'm currently writing a book on Barbara Jordan, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Stacey Abrams. And yesterday, when I was working on my conclusion, your name came up in the book about Black women who have been trailblazers. And so I just want to make sure I mention that to you for days that you need a little extra push. You are from a long legacy of Black women who are opening doors for others. I just want to also remind our attendees to please put any questions you have for Madam Attorney General in the Q&A section. We're so privileged to have her here on a Saturday, so please make sure you get your questions in. So I want to continue along that train of thought, because with such high visibility, and you've got a lot on your plate this past month.
Just a little.
Just a touch. I know you can't get too much into it, even though, you're just amongst your sister friends here. We can have an off-the-record conversation, but there's a lot that you're managing. You are sort of emerging from the Trump administration. You're trying to work with a Biden-Harris administration that's getting their footing. You're working with the governor and Albany and all that is and is not. How are you staying grounded in this particular moment? And I think what's really important, the second part of this question is, because I think women on this call really need to hear it, what are you doing for self-care in this particular moment with what you're balancing, not just in New York State, but as an attorney general in the United States?
So, Professor Greer, I respect that you're a journalist, always trying to get a scoop. I respect that.
I'm just a professor.
You are. You're on your hustle. I got it. So, we're still investigating the Trump organization. We're still, as you know, we filed a lawsuit against the NRA. We're still in the midst of that. We're still in the midst of the opioid epidemic. We're trying to reach a settlement with the largest manufacturers and distributors, as well as the Sackler family and Purdue, the company that was responsible for this opioid epidemic. We have sued Facebook. We also have joined with other attorney generals in suing Google for violations of your privacy, for antitrust violations, for operating a monopoly, for monetizing your data, and for stifling small businesses, hurting small businesses and stifling competition. We have, again, some investigations that are still pending with respect to nursing homes. And then we've got an investigation, as you know, into the governor of the state of New York regarding some allegations of sexual harassment. And we still are doing defensive work, defending the state of New York, defending all state agencies, and engaging in some affirmative litigation. One case that we just announced 2 weeks ago was a young gentleman in the Bronx who unfortunately was trafficking Black and brown women, Black and brown girls, all under the age of 15, luring them to his home with marijuana and with food. And these were girls who were primarily homeless. And that's a case that I directly got involved in because I was offended by the facts. And as a result of that, we have indicted him, and his case is ongoing. And we held a forum with a number of advocacy groups about human trafficking in not all over the state of New York, but specifically in the city of New York. And then most recently, there was a case that we worked on that I got involved in, and that was against Microsoft, that was charging individuals in Yonkers and in Bronxville the wrong sales tax. And the restitution to consumers was relatively minimal, de minimis to be exact. And so we worked with school superintendents in Yonkers, and we pooled the resources together to a total of $150,000, and we provided those resources to the Yonkers school district for homeless children to get iPads and Wi-Fi and other technology so that they too can continue in their educational process. It's that type of creative things that I love doing. Litigation funds from bad landlords we use for tenant organizing and to assist those who are struggling with lead and other conditions in their home in upstate New York. And we're trying to make sure that I cover all corners of New York, from the Canadian border all the way to Suffolk. So I get my grounding because I'm reminded of who I am each and every day as I walk the streets of my beloved Brooklyn. And I am deep in my faith, and my church provides me with inspiration, and it feeds my soul and my spirit, which is why one of my favorite day is usually Sunday, listening to the word. And I rely upon the word at a time, given all that I'm dealing with at this point in time. It strengthens my soul, steels my constitution, and it continues. And all of the individuals who believe in a higher power circle me with prayer and circle me with love. And that is where I get my strength from each and every day. It's from on high. And as a result of that, I will continue to be grounded and continue to have faith in a higher being, in a sense, morals. And at my core is this moral steadiness. Whenever I tend to lose my focus, I rely upon that moral center, and it gets me through my day, and it restores my soul, and it reminds me that all I have to do is what is right, and at the end of the day, let the chips fall where they may.
I thank you for that. So I want to transition into some of the questions we're getting in from our attendees, and I'd like to remind attendees we are so privileged to have Madam Attorney General here on a Saturday. So if you have any questions, please put them in so we can try and get as many as possible. This one is from Ronald Richter, and he wanted to know your thoughts on legal solutions to educational segregation that result in lesser quality services to Black children in New York. And we've obviously heard a lot about that during COVID with the inequities that continue to grow, and some Black children especially are left out of the educational system due to resources or lack thereof.
So I've been we have a Civil Rights Bureau, and our Civil Rights Bureau is looking into jurisdictions all across the state of New York. We are trying to dismantle that school to prison pipeline and focus on disparities in service. We are also, again, as you know, on the defensive side of defending the campaign for the lawsuit that was brought against the state of New York on behalf of the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. And we're trying to come to some work with the administration to try to achieve more parity and more fairness in the system. But I believe, the law has always been used as a sword and as a shield. And as we analyze jurisdictions all across the state of New York, including but not limited to East Ramapo, where there is a monitor in place as a result of some disparities in that school system, which is headed by individuals who, unfortunately, their children are not enrolled in public school, and certain policies that have been implemented, as well as disciplinary efforts that have been discriminatory and racist. My Civil Rights Bureau has been focused, and we have sent out attorneys and advocates and paras and investigators to basically examine the funding, the budgets of these municipalities, and the services that low-income children and children of color are currently receiving.
So I want to shift gears just to broaden that out just a little bit. We have someone who's popping up on the chat, but I wanted to know, what advice would you give Black women who are looking to run for office and oftentimes told to wait their turn?
Well, I don't know what it means to wait our turn. If we waited our turn, I don't think we would be celebrating Kamala Harris as the first Black Asian vice president of these United States. And I don't think that I would be in this position as the Attorney General if we waited our turn. Oftentimes we've got you just have to run. And what you have to do more than anything else is organize, organize, and organize. And particularly now, and there's so many issues, so many grassroots issues that you can organize around and that you can mobilize groups to move you forward and to elevate you. We also have to register individuals. We haven't engaged in a massive voter education and a voter registration drive in a very long time. And I think it's incumbent upon this organization and or the women on this call and the men on this call and their individual counties and towns and villages and hamlets to register individuals to vote and to educate the electorate about what's happening in the state of New York, where the power is, where the funding comes in, how it is appropriated, how it is allocated, the different formulas that are used, and the disparities that continue to exist and persist.
Well, we have another question. This one from Anthony Gaskin, who says, how do you see our brothers in this struggle of justice and advancement? Also, how do you see the NYC Police Department, so the NYPD, and their interaction with the Black community, since we know those interactions and that history has oftentimes been tragic?
So as you know, I just recently sued NYPD on its handling of these mass protests. And the litigation that I filed basically has confirmed my findings, and that is NYPD is poorly trained to deal with mass protests dating back to the Republican convention in the, I believe, the late before 1998, I believe, and then Occupy Wall Street, and most recently in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd and others. They are unfortunately not prepared and not trained adequately, and they engage in excessive force in response to individuals who are peacefully protesting in violation of the First and the 14th Amendment. They used pepper spray, they used bicycles, they used their cars. During the curfew, they arrested essential workers and legal observers and others in violation of those executive orders. And so I could not sit back. And after hearing after I held a 3-day hearing, a public hearing where 100 protesters came before me and provided me with evidence, both physical and on video, of the violations of law, it was clear that we had to take legal action. And my findings have been recently confirmed by Corporation Counsel of the City of New York, the Inspector General's Office, as well as CCRB. That case is going forward. Again, we are seeking a monitor over NYPD's practice. Previously, as an Assistant Attorney General, I was part of a team that investigated NYPD for its stop and frisk abuses. They have abated, and so I recognize the power of the law. And right now I am, although all of the proposals that were put forth by the City Council were not adopted, the City Council, as you know, just recently, just in the last 48 hours, passed a bill to reform qualified immunity so that police officers would be subject to litigation individually, as opposed to being protected by the City of New York. There are some other provisions that need to go forward, including but not limited to not allowing one individual, that is the commissioner of the City of New York, to be responsible for, ultimately to be responsible for discipline actions and for promotion above and beyond certain levels within NYPD. There's a lot of movement, room for progress within NYPD. The rank and file, as most of you know, is primarily officers of color, but beyond the rank and file, from detective to lieutenant to sergeant, captain, and beyond, it's predominantly white. And we need to change that. We need to make sure that the diversity of NYPD reflects the diversity of the City of New York, and that includes, but is not limited to, women. Women, again, need to join the force. Our numbers are low within NYPD, and I believe that women lead differently, they manage differently, they perform differently, And at the end of the day, women basically just get results.
Case end point. This next question is from Reverend Lana Antar. It's about misinformation and disinformation. And Reverend asks your thoughts on reducing and eliminating disinformation, especially as coming from broadly listened to media outlets such as Fox News, where many people who are not on social media, such as seniors, they get their information from these outlets. And there's a concern about the unrebutted factual lies or facts and lies that still hover broadly over American society. Can you talk about that?
So the Democratic attorney generals, I think it was primarily Democratic attorney generals. We have recently written a letter to Facebook and to Google and to other platforms, online platforms, with regards to disinformation and misinformation. There was a hearing, as most of you know, where Amazon, Google, and Facebook, the CEOs of these three companies, testified before Congress in regards to the misinformation. And so there's a question as to whether or not they should face liability. And there's a section of the law, the Decency and Communications Act, Section 3 in particular, which basically provides immunity for these online platforms. And so there is right now an effort afoot, and it's both basically bipartisan, to remove that protection so that individuals, so that these platforms, Facebook, Google, Amazon, and others, can be held liable for the misinformation and the disinformation that continues on their platform. In regards to Fox 5 and its medium, what can I say? It's unfortunately, the events of January 6th, the insurrection, they're questioning. They believe in the big lie that's been told by the previous president, President Trump, that in fact he won the election, and they do not believe that this Voting Rights Act, this Voting Rights Bill that was passed in Georgia, that there's nothing wrong with it. So I just think, and when it comes to Fox 5, I'm hoping that a new buyer comes forward and purchases Fox 5 and converts it to a platform that speaks truth and speaks facts.
Thank you. Well, this question is near and dear to my heart. I'm very excited to hear your response. The question is, there are quite a few candidates running for mayor. What qualifications do you think we need to look for in the next mayor of New York City? Especially, you spent time in the city council, you were a public advocate where you sometimes had to tangle with the mayor. So what do you think we should be looking for in the next mayor of New York City?
So I teach a class at Columbia on policing. And I've asked some of the candidates to come before me, as well as my co-professor, Professor Basil Smikle, to talk about their qualifications. So I'm going to resist that question, but let me just say in general, what I'm looking for is an individual who has values, progressive values, who knows and who has experience in government, who knows all of the agencies, and who recognizes that some communities, there's been a disinvestment in certain communities, and that we can't not return to normal after this pandemic. I refuse to turn to normal, that we have got to engineer our economy going forward with an emphasis on women and women of color in particular. We've got to make sure that we have a green economy that divests from fossil fuels, that focuses more on renewables, and that we've got to, again, reimagine and look at policing in the city of New York, that we have to talk about opportunities and access to different economies for communities that have been, there's been no disinvestment. We've got to focus on residents of public housing. NYCHA needs to be part of this infrastructure bill that the federal government is currently negotiating, and there needs to be a push. I know that I will be pushing with other Democratic attorney generals that NYCHA and other public housing all across this nation be included in that infrastructure bill. And the list goes on and on. But I want someone with bold ideas, with courage, and with a policy which is different from previous administration. Again, that will not return us to normal, but in fact embraces a bold new future going forward.
Right. This new reimagining of what we can be as a city is incredibly important. So the next question is, what can all these social and community organizations like the Links, like Jack and Jill, for example, do as nonprofits to make real impact in some of the voting rights initiatives you mentioned previously?
So we've got to look to Georgia right now. I think given corporations need to stand up. If you serve on a board, if you work for a major corporation where its offices are in Georgia, they need to stand up and they need to take a stand. They can't just take a position in support of voting rights on one day, and that's Martin Luther King Day. And then when it comes to actually implementing change and standing up and taking a position, they back down and they become invisible. So I urge all of you to reach out to these major corporations. And there have been calls to perhaps boycott Georgia, not to have mass events in Georgia, not to have conventions in Georgia. And Georgia needs to understand that this is not just a statewide issue. This is a national issue. When you, again, trespass on the rights of communities of color, on individuals who tend to vote Democratic, when you reverse all of the progress that we have made because you want to hold on to power, it is unacceptable. And so we've got to stand with all of them. And then last but not least, we've got to urge United States senators and our New York State Senator, Chuck Schumer, the filibuster must be repealed and or modified. We cannot allow the filibuster to continue. Otherwise, all that we voted for, all the change that we voted for will not be put in place, from the Voting Rights Act to criminal justice reform, the George Floyd Act, to infrastructure reform, to assistance for those who are struggling right now during this pandemic, for the feminization of poverty, to a Green New Deal. All of this will be caught up in the hands of just one senator from West Virginia. And that really should not be the case. So get rid of the filibuster. Again, reach out to major corporations, consider whether or not we should boycott Georgia, and go forward again in a progress, again, reforming our economy going forward with an eye towards those who unfortunately are suffering not only from COVID-19, but from systemic racism and systemic inequality.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw on social media this morning all the information for Coca-Cola, since their headquarters are in Atlanta, essentially reaching out to them and saying, if you want us to continue buying your products, we need you to actually say something about what has gone on in Georgia this past week. This next question is
not only say something, but do something about it. Mm-hmm. Right. Stop investing, stop funding Republicans.
Right. And we have the power to do so, since we know that African Americans put a lot of money into the economy on a daily basis. This next question is from Madam President, Dr. Jones. The question for you is, what advice do you give to women in leadership in the field of education as they navigate the challenges that have been presented regarding providing equitable supports to all students when there are so many forces fighting against the issues?
Yeah, remote learning has been a challenge. Our children and children in general have just lost a year of education. And there are so many children, unfortunately, who do not have access to the internet because the digital divide is real. And that's another issue. We've got to call upon all of these mass communication companies and these phone companies to provide internet access to rural communities and to urban communities and to children who are homeless at this point in time. We've got to provide them with services. And so, I believe in the power of union. And I know that all of the individuals who are teachers on this call, who are scholars, belong to certain unions, and unions obviously need to do more and in demanding an agenda which includes but is not limited to social justice and addressing the inequities in education. It's unfortunate, but I don't know. There's when I provided those resources to Yonkers and to see what homeless children have to experience and contend with, young children each and every day, in trying to maintain and remaining on task with their curriculum. I don't know how they do it. It's difficult. So all of us need to band together. We need to make sure, if you've got time, to teach a child to read, to find out what nearest homeless shelter could use your services. Illiteracy continues to be a problem within our community. We've just got to extend a hand and do more, and in particularly in the area of education, because education is the key to overcome a number of isms, from racism to sexism, and we again have to address the digital divide and to assist these families who are struggling with learning remotely. And so I'm trying to use the power of the law and settlement funds to address these systemic inequities. And I urge all of my teachers and scholars and all of those who care about this systemic inequalities to use your voice, to use your power, to use your time to read to a child and to assist them in staying on task.
Right. And this is our last question from one of our attendees. I'd like to hear your thoughts about Latinas and the Latinx. There are a few Latinas in positions of power, particularly in federal and city positions. What can we do to better empower this particular group?
So, Black Lives Matter, their agenda includes, but is not limited to, allyship. And so I believe we need to form coalitions and we need to have allies. And we were allies in the aftermath of George Floyd. The march that I witnessed down my street from Barclays Arena, which was the focal point, was a diverse crowd, mostly white, but it was diverse. Latinx, Latinas, the members of the LGBT community, white sisters and brothers, they all marched. It's really critically important that we form allies, and that we form allies with the Latin community as well, Latina community, Latinx community, Generation X, all of those and more. And we become more powerful when we band together and when we fight against systemic inequality, systemic racism, and when we become a force to be reckoned with. And that's how we are going to dismantle the injustices that we witnessed in Georgia. We're going to have to do this together, calling upon corporate America, calling upon all of our allies in different spaces, and standing together to dismantle what is nothing more than an attempt to hold on to power in Georgia. That's all that this is about. This has nothing to do with voter fraud. It has all to do with suppressing voter suppression and, again, denying people access to the ballot, which is a basic and fundamental element of our democracy. So let us stand together, just as all of the colors in this shirt. Let us all stand together as one, in one beautiful semblance and symbol of mosaic power.
Thank you. I do have one quick question, because I would be remiss. Dr. Michael Lindsay, who's the executive director of the McSilver Institute, had a question, so I want to make sure I get that in. And so Dr. Lindsay asks, it seems that we're hearing of new attacks on Asian Americans on a daily basis, random attacks, and even an upsurge in attacks after protests. What is New York State doing to further restrict gun access or any other protections to ensure the safety of Asian American citizens, particularly in light of the fact that hate crime charges are so rare?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, there's been a number of rallies in support of the Asian community, and I stand shoulder to shoulder with the Asian community, and I stand against hate. There is no room for hate in New York State at all, and it will not be tolerated. And I will use the full force of my office against anyone who singles out an individual simply because of their race, their ethnicity, and who they love. And so we've got in the Office of the Attorney General, I have a hate crimes task force, 1-800-771-7755. That's 1-800-771-7755. And we have joined with law enforcement all across the state of New York, again, to extend a hand to the Asian community. The Asian community, there's been a number of stereotypes that they are the model minority, that they're docile, that they're not ones to fight back, and that they're not ones to report crimes. And all of that is false. The reality is that we have got to stand with the Asian community just as they stood with us during the Black Lives Matter movement. And we have got to stand together against all types of hate. 2, the law. You're absolutely right. Hate crimes are difficult to prosecute, one, because of the issue of intent. And it's really difficult to determine what was their racial animus and or intent of individuals. But oftentimes it all depends upon what they say. It all depends upon the facts of individual cases. Nonetheless, although I have limited criminal jurisdiction, I've got my office is primarily civil enforcement. And so we are pursuing civil enforcement actions against those individuals who would violate the human rights of any individual group. And that's why we have the Hate Crimes Task Force. And that's why we are standing together with the Asian community. But it's also important that we, again, engage in education, and we talk about the history of Asian Americans in this country, and the dark history of racism against the Asian community, and how they too were marginalized. They too were subjected to oppression. They too were victims of racism. And we need to educate our children and others with regards to the history of Asians in this country. So let us stand together with the Asian community. Let us, again, pray for those 8 lives who were lost in Atlanta, but specifically the 6 Asian women who were low-wage women, because this crime against these 8 individuals, and specifically the 6, were not just hate crimes, but they were misogynistic in general because they objectified Asian women. And so let us, again, join with them, join with our Asian community. Let us stand together against hate. Let us stand again with those individuals who lost their lives in Colorado. Let's get rid of the filibuster so that we can pass responsible gun laws in this country. In New York, we have some of the most comprehensive gun laws in New York State. But you all know that guns don't respect borders, and that there are states that unfortunately send traffic in guns and celebrate guns. Right. And their guns travel up the I-87 to New York and wreak havoc. And so we need responsible gun laws in these United States of America, including but not limited to ghost guns. And this was an issue that we challenged the previous administration, because the Trump administration allowed gun laws to be marketed online. So you can go online and find out how to put together a ghost gun, which is untraceable, and they need to be banned. And I'm so glad that the Biden administration agrees with us, and they are working on regulations to ban these ghost guns, which can be put together and manufactured online using parts which are not regulated. And the Biden administration will work with us and other states across this nation to ban that. But most importantly, the Biden administration will work again to pass responsible gun laws, but we've got to get rid of the filibuster in the United States Senate. I'm sorry for going long, but it's an issue that I care about. But I am so glad that Dr. Jones asked that question, and others. I appreciate that.
And thank you so much, Madam Attorney General, for spending your Saturday with us. I also want to give a special thank you to all of you for joining the Greater New York Links and the NYU McSilver Institute for the inaugural She Leads Speaker Series. Please stay connected with us, and to receive updates regarding upcoming events and programs, please check out the slides that will come up. And then happy Women's History Month. Please stay safe and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And again, thank you again, Madam Attorney General, for spending your Saturday with us.
Thank you, Professor Greer. Links, thank you. God bless you. May you continue to do good work, and may you continue to stand strong. Happy Women's Month and Black Girl Magic Year.
Yes, indeed. And I just want to, as people are sort of closing out, I just want to thank you again. We say Madam Attorney General, and I know you don't like titles, and most people in Brooklyn just know you as Tish, right? They see you across the street, they say Tish. But you probably don't remember this, but when you attended an event at Fordham, and I told you how my administrative assistant essentially put everything together, you wrote her, I had a card that I was going to give her. You wrote her a note in that card just to thank her for her administrative services. And I just want to sort of highlight for our attendees, that's the 360 vision that you have. You're dealing with the president, you're dealing with the governor, you're dealing with the mayor, but you also have time for folks who are across the street who scream Tish, and our administrative assistants who make all of this happen. So I just want to thank you again for being who you are, and best of luck in the upcoming months, because nothing really is going on in Albany. So hopefully you have a quiet summer.
Thank you. Let us hold up one another. And thank you for that young sister. That was important, that we hold her up, support her, and let her know that I've got her back. Always. God bless you all. Have a good weekend. Happy Easter, everyone.
Thank you.